Today, Amy from Gwinnett Mercy University, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I must say, it's always a pleasure for you to join me.
I'm always happy to be with you.
Very knowledgeable. So today we're talking about college applicate or essays, and what goes into that. Because there's many things that we don't know, and you know better than us. And maybe there's some misunderstanding among parents and students. And I know there's probably no right or wrong, but let's fine tune the whole college essay piece. Very important.
Yeah.
Um, because it is a marketing tool, correct, for an individual.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great way for students to talk a little bit about themselves, right? And provide some insight to the reviewer, whoever's reading their application, on who they are outside of their grades or SAT score or whatever. It's a great way for us to learn a little bit more about the student, especially because now more than ever, you know, college fairs are very quick. You have a 30-second conversation or less with an admissions counselor. Or if you don't have an opportunity to go to the high school visit of the college that you're interested in attending, that's usually when we get to know students, right? Is in
Mm-hmm.
those interactions. So if for whatever reason, a student doesn't get a chance to participate in those, then the essay is sort of the next way that we get to learn about a student and their situation.
What on the average would you say the average is in college space? It's hard to say a number, but give me an idea of how many applications slash essays an admission team would review in a year.
Yeah, so I can say at GMRCU right now, we're at about 1,500 applications. Now
Wow.
that's pretty small actually.
Really?
Yeah, so previous institutions I've worked at, there are 25,000 applications that come through. And some of those applications, so I will say some of them are sort of scored out. So if a student meets all the admissions criteria, a reader might not necessarily review their application. But for all of those students who are borderline, right? So think of those students who may be right on the cusp of being admissible. We're almost always going to read those essays because we're trying to get more context about what's going on with that student.
Mm-hmm.
And smaller institutions, especially, and more highly selective institutions, they typically have a committee that will read, or two or three people that will read. And so then you may have two or three eyes on your essay. And so then you have more opinions, right? Then maybe a larger institution where one student or one counselor or reader reads your essay.
Is it a vote at the end? Is it really a voting process?
Yeah, I mean with the committees, more often than not, it's a conversation, right? So what are some of the key points that everyone sort of brought to the table? What are the similarities that the folks saw? What are some challenges? Where did the committee see those things addressed?
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes that's in the essay where they're seeing, oh, this student had a challenge, obviously had a challenge in sophomore year. Their grades look a little bit down, but they addressed it in their essay. And so now we
Mm-hmm.
can really pinpoint and say, this was the situation, this is how they got over it, here are their new strategies, and this is why we still think that they'll be successful in our institution even though they had that wonky year.
Yeah. All right. Before we highlight all the things that should be included, um, what are some of the quick red flags that you see from the get go that be like, no good?
Oh, yeah. That's a really good question. So often if I pull up an essay, and I can see like I'm scanning it, for example, and I see a lot of writing mistake, like spelling errors. That's a very quick thing
Yeah.
for me. Um, if I let's see, I mean that's a huge one, especially if I pull it into Word, and I see a lot of red squiggly lines. That's usually a challenge.
Yeah.
Um, those missed words, the there, and theirs, and the who's and whos, and those sorts of things that often are not caught necessarily by Word or Grammarly or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
because they are maybe grammatically wrong, but the spelling is correct. That tells me usually that the student didn't reread or proof their work or didn't have somebody else read it. Um,
And
so
we're going to get into that.
we're gonna get to that, but yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
that's usually the biggest thing. If it's short, if it's like one paragraph, I usually know you probably haven't told me too much.
yeah.
And say,
No, that's okay. I didn't mean to interrupt you. So before we go into these items real quick, how long should an essay be?
I would usually say about a page.
Okay,
If you're gonna do a page single spaced, I usually tell students like 500 to 800 words. So
perfect.
for most people, that's double space. Like 500 words is like a page, maybe a little bit more than a page. You don't have to go crazy. Remember, we're reading like 1,000 applications. So if you go too crazy, it's like resumes, right? You read the first page, all the key information should be on that first page, maybe your conclusions at the very end. Um, but as much as you can get in on that first page.
And it truly is a reflection of that individual being able to, you know, get their point across in that short amount of words, right? Because if you said
Exactly.
3 pages, they would go on and ramble, probably, maybe.
Or
All
they're
right,
trying to find
so
filler. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, right,
Yeah.
exactly. All right, let's start. Here we go. Be authentic. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, we want to know who you are. So if I can always tell, especially when I meet a student and then I read their essay, if that student wrote the essay or if they had a lot of input from
How?
maybe somebody else.
How do you know that?
Because your personality shines through in your writing, right? So even the difference between professional writing, if you talk to me on the street and you meet me in my office, I'm pretty similar. My personality is pretty similar. The way I speak is pretty similar. And the way I write an email, pretty similar to how I speak in the world. Now, no colloquialisms, not a lot of you won't see y'all in my writing, even though you might hear me say it. But
Y'all,
it's that sort of
I'm
thing.
sure it happens.
Yeah, and I can recognize that, right? So when I see a student, I can often hear the influence of a parent or an over editor, something like that, especially when I have the chance to meet a student.
Yeah.
And when I look at their classes, right? So if you're in an AP English, for example,
Mm-hmm.
your writing looks a little bit different than
Mm-hmm.
someone who might be in college prep English.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So, hey, students and parents, I mean, I think it's natural for parents just want to be that extra, you know, eyes and put their eyes and their 2 cents into the essay.
Yeah,
Understandably, I get it.
100%. But I would
Yeah.
say to parents, encourage your student, like they are authentic. The hardest thing for us to do as humans is to say good things about ourselves, nice things about ourselves. So in that authenticity, like remind your student, hey, remember when you did blah, blah, blah? Hey, remember when you did this really cool thing? Because your student isn't necessarily going to highlight that in their essay. And so more than anything, allow them to talk about it in their authentic way, but remind them of those key points, of those really cool things that they did.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Grab the reader from the start.
Yeah, I mean that's a hard one, right? Without being a storyteller, right? Once upon a time, right? Like don't start it with that, right? But truly, I mean, I think getting our attention, right? It was a cold and stormy night. That sounds different than one morning when I woke up. It's like you think about what's gonna bring the reader in. What's the hook, right? And what are you going to talk about? Um, I think, I love to read stories about people. I love when they talk about themselves. And so if you just say, it was a Tuesday and I was walking down the street, I'm like, okay, next, skip to the end. Think about admissions counselors are human too, right? So think about your um, essay as a TikTok. So what makes you stay on a TikTok and not just scroll to the next one? Right? So think about us in that same way.
Good idea. Good idea. Give me one more. Give me one more attention grabber if you can think of one.
Oh
How about
gosh.
like family members, grandma, Uncle Bob? No.
If you're going to talk about a parent, grandparent or whatever, My grandmother was a firecracker. Oh my gosh. Okay, great. How was she a firecracker? Talk to me a little bit about that. Or my grandmother was, I talk about my grandmother all the time. My grandmother is one of the most important people in my world. Okay, why? That's going to grab me. Like, tell me that thing that makes me ask a question. That's going to be the thing that keeps me reading. So why is your grandmother the center of your world? I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to keep reading to find the answer to that.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, next, focus on deeper themes. What would that
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you don't have to be a philosopher in your essay, although you certainly can be. But more often than not, the sort of surface level is not going to keep us, right? So, for example, at Gwynedd, one of our essay questions is talk to us about a challenge that you overcame, right? So I want you to think about that challenge, but also think more deeply about the impact it had to you and the process through which you came through it, right? Instead of you just saying, this horrible thing happened and I came out on the other side. Okay. How? Why? Again,
What would be a good response to that? How would they follow up with that?
yeah, so I have students who talk about I've had students in the past who've talked about mental health challenges, right? And they've said, my sophomore year, blah 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 went on, and I was able to work with my faculty, my teachers, work with my parents, get a therapist, whatever it was, to show the progress. Now, you don't have to go that personal, right? That's totally up to you. When you're writing your essay, you should write what you would feel comfortable with me reading, right? So I know effectively I'm a stranger. So you
Right.
should not necessarily feel like you have to write more than you feel comfortable with. But at the end of the day, I'm going to be looking for the strategies that you used to overcome whatever that obstacle was, not necessarily you harping on the obstacle itself.
Mm-hmm. Are there any lines that should not be crossed? How, like, what would be some, if there's any, where should a student not go with the essay?
Um,
Or
so I
not? Maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there are some lines. I think that again, you should be thoughtful about that, about what you write. More often than not, if students provide information, I mean, we're mandatory reporters at the college level. So if something comes across that you say you want to hurt yourself or others, we have to call your counselor. We have to, we're required by law
Yeah.
to make a phone call there. But I've had some students that have expressed things to me that have actually worked out positively because I've been able to connect them at the institution and say, oh, you have this support source at your high school, here's your support source at the college.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's the counseling center or student support services or whatever the case is, there's tons of people that are on college campuses to help you, or peer tutoring or whatever. Um, I've been able to make a connection for the student early on in the process so that they feel confident that they're going to have the same support throughout the process.
Mm-hmm. All right. Um, Next, show, don't tell.
Yeah. I don't necessarily need a rehash of your student involvement resume. So I do have students that sometimes are like, I played soccer for the last 3 years. I did wrestling for the past year. Cool. Why does that matter to me? Right? I mean, I think that that's the end at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
What does that tell me about you? Does it show me your deep commitment to teamwork? Does it show you your deep commitment to a team? Were you a leader at any point in that process? So yeah, show, don't tell. Go a little bit deeper into why that might matter to the person who's reading.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Try doing something different.
Yeah. I love this option even outside of an essay, right? So try something different. Reach out to your institution and say, "Hey, I'm not the best writer. I want to provide you with an essay, but I'd love to send you a video."
Cool.
I mean, try it out, right?
Right.
Because your institution is going to be like, oh, innovative. Let's
Yes.
see, let's try that. Because if you know that writing is not necessarily your strong point, um, writing an essay to the best of your ability might look a little different, right? But if you know that you're really creative and you're really passionate, and maybe you want to write a poem, or maybe you want to write a fiction, what I would say about that is just let the reader know that that's what you're doing. Let's just say,
That makes
you know,
sense.
for my essay, I've decided to blah, 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 blah. And that way, when we read it, we understand where you're going, as opposed to being like, this is weird. this,
Yeah.
this was something interesting, but don't be afraid to be creative as well. Again, and to say, I'm a spoken word poet. I would rather talk to you about my essay in that format, and reach out to your institution and say, is that okay?
So think outside the box.
Think outside the box.
That's my takeaway from that.
We love it. Yeah. And don't forget, like back to that first point, right? We're trying to stand out, right? We're trying to stand out in your essay. There's not much more that stands out than they didn't write an essay. They did this cool thing, right? They're gonna
Hmm.
remember that you put together a YouTube video or made a TikTok or
I love it.
yeah,
I love it. All right, let's go down the list. Let's keep the ball rolling. We have a few more to go.
yeah,
Write with the reader in mind.
yeah. So remember, we're reading 1,000 of these, right? So are you organized? Did you put paragraphs or is there just one paragraph? Are you, I'm a big outline person. So I like to start with my topic and then put the key things that I want to put in my paragraph and then kind of move from there. Um, are you sort of all over the place in your essay? Because if you are, I might be like, I have no idea what this student was saying. Next. Um, so try to think about your story in a kind of a linear fashion. Um, but also, does what you're saying only make sense to you? Did you use a lot of um I'm trying to think of the word. Um uh anyways, it'll come to me. It'll come to me.
I get it.
Like
I get it.
FAFSA, like words that a like a regular person wouldn't know, right? So like in college admissions, for example, we always try to break down what does FAFSA mean. We always try to break down what does FERPA stand for. All of those things. Are you doing a lot of that? Are you saying when I was in DECA and blah 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 blah, and I was in FBLA and I was in FFA what are all of those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So don't forget that the person who's reading your essay might not be familiar with those things. They may have not been involved in those things.
I would say
Um,
that happens a lot, though, right? Just life in general.
yeah, yes, of course, because you're used to calling it the whatever, um, you know, um, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, right? You're used to being like FCA, and I'm going to an FCA meeting, and I'm FCA, da da da. And I'm like, well, there's 20 clubs called FCA, right? So is it like, what is it? What's the context around that? So don't be afraid to say, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, parentheses, FCA. Okay,
Sure.
now I know what FCA is going to stand for throughout the rest of the paper.
Think about that piece because that eliminates any misunderstanding.
Correct.
You can stay focused. That's a good point.
Exactly. Again, like remember, if you're sending it to Gwen and Mercy and you're sending it to Penn State and you're sending it to all of these places, right? You're sending your essay around and around. What does FCA stand for in their backyard? Because it
Mm-hmm.
might not, you know, FFA, like Future Farmers of America, Future
Wait.
Firefighters of America.
Federal Aviation Administration.
Right. Like, what is that? What is it? So just don't forget to explain and don't
Yeah,
forget to and maybe ask somebody who's not as familiar with you and say, did everything I write make sense? Do you understand what I'm saying?
we're going to
Um,
mention that in a second.
yes.
All right, so let's go on with this one. Write several drafts. Kind of piggyback off what you just said. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I mean, I encourage people to write multiple of the same essay. A great way to do that is to work with your English teacher and to say, "Hey, can I use this as a writing assignment? Um, I'm working on my college essays. Is there a way that I can use it as my writing assignment?" Because the other thing that you're going to do, and we're going to talk about it in a second, is then you have somebody else reading it, somebody else
Mm-hmm.
editing it, somebody else looking at it. So then you have multiple iterations that you can write. You can write it the first time and say, that felt okay.
Yeah.
I want to add more, or I needed to add less, or that's too long, or, I said a
I
bunch
would
of
say
things
at
that
this
don't make any
point,
sense.
I would say at this point that writing several drafts supports. Don't claim to know it all. Don't think you as a student parent what you have is the all be all, right? Because this is really important.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I tell students all the time, if you want me to read your essay before,
Perfect.
I'm happy. There's so many people in your life, in your community that are happy to look at a draft,
Sure.
right? And for you to say, this is a draft.
You know what? But this goes back to like life 101. If you don't ask,
Right.
you know, if you don't
Yeah,
ask, you won't be able to move it forward, possibly.
exactly.
Um, what
Exactly.
about reading it out loud? These all tie in together, but these are just confirmations of what you need to do. Read it out loud. Go ahead.
Yeah. How does it sound to you? Right? Like, how does it sound? And not only you read it out loud, have somebody read it out loud to you. Right? It's because if you read it out loud, you're like, I know what I wrote, right? But
Yeah.
have your parent read it out loud to you, have your teacher, have a friend read it out loud to you, because then you're like, wait, that's not what I meant, or that sounds weird when you read it. Even though
How
it
about
made sense to
videotaping?
you.
Videotaping it.
Oh yeah, videotaping. Yeah, Zoom has a great feature where you can do a 2 minute little recording and watch
Cool.
yourself. So that's a cool option too. If you have Zoom, or even if you
Yeah.
again, if you just want to watch yourself do it. Yeah.
All right. I love this one. Don't repeat.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yes. Try to do your best to again, this is part of that organization piece. That was
Mm-hmm.
a couple of points before. You've already said it. Let's move on to the next thing. And it's don't harp on something, right? We get it. That thing was amazing or terrible or whatever. We
Well, give me an
understood.
example.
Um,
Put you on the spot.
uh, tough class, right? Got an F in a class. Don't harp on it. Okay, you got an F. What did you do to fix your grade?
Right.
Right?
But
Because
why
if
do
you're
people
like,
repeat themselves though? What it is in that person? We're all guilty of it to a point. But what's the psychology behind why we repeat ourselves?
well, you want to drive the point home, right? You want to say, I want to make sure that you know that this was the worst thing that ever happened. Like, I'm trying to drive it home. Yeah, I got it. 100%. I get it. That's why you wrote about it, right? That's why you picked this topic to write about. So
I
it
don't mean that.
obviously was impactful to you. So
But short,
yeah,
sweet to the point, right?
be concise. I mean,
I
sometimes that is the key. That's right.
All right. We talked about this. Ask others to read your essay, right? All over and over and over again.
Yes.
We talked about pay attention to the form, your outline. Let's get into this one. This is the last one.
Yeah.
End your essay with a kicker, right? So I guess from an admission team perspective, by the time you get to the end of this essay, you're ready to move on, right? It's kind of like getting out of the car. Like, what's the one thing that's going to keep me here for the last second that is going to be a wow?
Right. Right. I mean, what's the thing that you want me to remember when I'm done with your essay? That's what you should end with, right? What is the one thing that you said, if you take nothing else away from this whole essay, I want you to remember that I am X.
Mm-hmm.
I am blah, blah, blah,
Give
whatever
me a
it
good
is.
example. Let's make it juicy. What comes to your?
Um,
What's the
that
kicker?
I am tenacious, that I am a leader, that I am mercy material. I mean, I love when people say that.
Yeah,
Personally, like all of the things in my essay, the point of it, the point of why I shared it with you is because blah blah blah.
but they have to support what you're saying, correct?
Yeah,
Back it
yeah.
up.
So right, right. Because if you say, and that's why I am Mercy, and like you've written nothing about being Mercy in the entire essay, I'm gonna be like, okay, tell me again why you were being Mercy. But yeah, but yeah, I mean, that's why I am resilient. That's why I have grit. That's why I am going to be the best candidate for your institution, right?
Hmm.
Like all of those things. Because the person who's reading, especially in committees, they're often taking notes, right? So there's
Yeah.
like highlight da 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 da. Ah, this is why. Okay, yeah, 100%. Yep, everything that I've written down so far totally aligns with that.
Hmm. Hmm. All right. So let's end it with this. My perception is that just people in general, you remember the beginning of something and the end, and the
Mhm.
middle. Does that apply to a college essay?
I would say more likely than not. Yeah, more often
There
than
you go.
not. Yep, pull me in
Pull me in.
and leave
Keep me.
me wanting to meet. And that's the other thing that I tell students all the time. Leave me wanting to meet you. I read your essay and now I cannot wait to have you on my campus
Hmm.
for an open house. I can't wait to meet you, you know, for whatever. Um, those are the best essays I think that I've ever read. When I walk away going, "Oh my gosh, I can't wait to meet so and so so that I can ask them about this essay." And when I'm signing letters, I'm often saying, "Thanks for telling me about blah blah blah." Like if your essay was really inspiring and I remember it, thanks for telling me about your blah blah. I know that GMRCU is going to make an impact with that,
How
right?
do you
That
spell blah
specific
blah?
thing. Blah. BLAHDEBLAH.
Oh,
Blah
just
de
kidding.
blah.
I love it. I love it. So we're talking about college essay and all the cool things that should or should not go into that process. We'll say college essay best practices 101. Amy, assistant VP of enrollment at Gwinnett Mercy. Thank you as always. This is good stuff. Now, parents, pay attention.
Yeah,
Don't
and
screw it up.
if you need any help, just holler. Just there's
Cool.
so many people who want to help you.
Cool. Thanks, Amy.
Yeah, you got it.